Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. I'm Annette Young. The ripples from Syria's civil war are now spreading across the region. In Iraq, a re-energised al-Qaeda is openly battling for control of several key cities and taking on the country's Shiite-led government. Also, Lebanon has been rocked by a series of what appears to be tit-for-tat bombings as Sunni and Shiite tensions worsen. And in recent days, a senior leader in Hezbollah, the Lebanese Shiite militant group, was assassinated. Not to mention, Syrian Islamist rebels are now turning on each other as they battle for control of the war-torn country. Now, here to make sense of it all is Matthew Levitt, an American specialist on Islamist extremism who's based in Washington. Matthew, thank you so much for being with us. Well, let's talk about what's happening across the region. It appears a sectarian war is breaking out on a number of fronts. Just how bad can it get?
It's really bad right now, and it can and will likely get a whole lot worse. At the epicenter of all of this, you have Syria coming on the heels of the earlier war in Iraq. And of course, these two now together are intertwined with Sunni and Shia fighting each other in both these countries. Shia fighters from Iraq now going to fight in Syria. The same Sunni fighters from Iraq fighting in Syria. And the al-Qaeda affiliate, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or al-Sham, is fighting on both sides. Iran and Hezbollah are involved, especially in Syria. And this sectarianism is spreading, we see, not only across the arc of the Levant, but into the Gulf as well. Have we passed the point of no return? Well, I think in large part we have. There's still very good reason to pursue Geneva II, the effort to negotiate a peace or at least a ceasefire in Syria. I'd like to be proven wrong, but I think it's very, very unlikely that there will be any success there. I think that the Assad regime is so far gone, it has done such horrible things to its people, that the chances of the Assad regime itself, the Alawite minority, being able to continue ruling Syria is not possible, certainly not without continued Iranian support, financing, and Hezbollah fighting on the ground on their behalf. Meanwhile, you've had a situation where once there was a relatively moderate Sunni rebel force, now the moderates among the rebels are a minority, and what you have are the best fighters, the most dangerous fighters within the rebels are actual al-Qaeda or other Islamists. In fact, some of those are now fighting one another. And so it's a very, very messy situation, which is bleeding over borders that are becoming less relevant today, bleeding west into Lebanon from Syria, east into Iraq, as we've seen in the past few days in Al-Anbar province, and my fear is that things are about to get worse. It's certainly becoming very difficult for Washington, isn't it? For example, on one hand, they're backing the Iranian Shiite-led government to fight al-Qaeda, yet this is the very same government who supports Syria's Bashar al-Assad. It is complicated, isn't it? You know, the Maliki-led government in Iraq, a Shia-led government, which is supported by Iran, is also getting some support from the United States, though the United States just indicated that it would not provide military support to help put down the al-Qaeda fighting that's going on in the Anbar province right now, but that we would help in other ways. Meanwhile, Iran and Hezbollah are literally all in on behalf of the Assad regime. Without their support, the Assad regime would not have lasted as long as it has. At one point, not that long ago, we were talking about the Assad regime having only a few weeks left to live, and now no one is talking about how long it has left to live. It indicates that it can go on with Iranian and Hezbollah support for quite some time, because you don't have on the rebel side an equal effort by the international community to support the rebels the way you do on the Assad side with Iran and Hezbollah, in large part because the moderate rebels were never able to coalesce, get along, form a unified leadership, military, civilian, political, both. And within that vacuum came al-Qaeda and other radical Islamists. And now we have a fear of, you know, an Afghanistan type of situation where al-Qaeda, radical Islamic militants come in, get armed, and then perhaps go on and fight another day. The problem is Afghanistan was far removed from the West. Syria is just a few hours from Europe. And so there's a tremendous concern in France and Brussels, across Europe, and by extension, even as far as the United States and Australia, about what happens when the people who are coming from the West to fight in Syria eventually come home.
So where does this leave Washington and the international community?
Well, the first thing is that it's not just Washington, it really is the international community. I think that the President of the United States has made it very, very clear he does not want to get directly involved. This is being seen as a civil war with the United States not wanting to pick sides. I think that this has been a mistake. I think the biggest mistake was not responding to the President's own red line when the Syrian regime used chemical weapons in a very large way, more than it had before in August. That presented us an opportunity to do something. At the time, I and others were calling for taking out the 12 to 15 runways in the country that are able to take these large airplanes resupplying weapons from Iran into Syria. If you had blown up those runways, and we do have specialized munitions for that, that would have been seen as not being something that threatened the regime's existence on the one hand, but would have undermined its ability to continue getting the weapons that it needs to fight the war the way it has. Today, we are in a situation where we're desperately trying to get the moderates within the rebels to coalesce, but we're recognizing that they're not doing that. And so the United States has even reached out to some of the Islamists, which I think is a mistake. The Islamists haven't reciprocated. Maybe that's a good thing.
But and in your opinion, why is it a mistake to sort of reach out to those Islamist groups?
Those groups that are antithetical to Western values, those groups that, whether they're actual al-Qaeda or not, but that want to set up an Islamic state ruled by Sharia law that is not going to be a friend of the West, that is going to present other regional problems that would maybe solve this problem but create a whole host of other problems. Those are not the types of parties that we should be reaching out to solve this conflict.
But it does appear
this has gotten much more.
I was going to say it's become much more complicated, and as we've seen, the tempo of violence has well and truly picked up, with groups now turning on one another. So what do you do in that situation?
In some cases, these groups turning on one another is a good thing. When different groups are taking on the al-Qaeda affiliates, Jabhat al-Nusra or ISIL, whether it's Kurdish groups or even other Islamist groups, that's a good thing. We need to be working within the nation-state system. This is a terrible, terrible conflict, a terrible, terrible humanitarian catastrophe. And we have a government in Lebanon, we have a government in Turkey, we have a government in Jordan, we even have a government in Iraq. And these governments, it's in their interest before anybody else's, as the countries that are immediately in the region, together with countries in Europe, which are just an hour, 2 hours away by plane, to try and bring this to a close. There's a lot more that can be done at the borders. One of the reasons foreign fighters are able to get into Syria to fight is because it's so easy to cross the border from Turkey. It's so easy to travel through Europe. People are concerned about the refugees that are coming from Syria through Turkey into places like Bulgaria, but we need to be even more concerned about the people who are going in the other direction. There's a lot more that can be done to train up and to arm some of the moderate forces that still do exist. This is not going to be an easy fix. We lost our opportunity to do things when there were easier things to do about 18 months ago. We now have to deal with the situation as it is. But I don't think that the simple solution, there is no simple solution, but I don't think we should think that there's a simple solution in reaching out to Islamic groups simply because they're capable fighters.
Now, you're a Hezbollah specialist, Matthew. Just how strong is the Lebanese Shiite militant group at the moment? Was that assassination of Hassan Lakis a major blow?
The assassination of Hassan Lakis was a significant hit to Hezbollah. He was an important figure who was involved in high technology projects, including Hezbollah's attempt to build a drone system. Earlier, he was involved in procurement efforts around the world and was outed here in a case here in the United States, which exposed his procurement activities in North America, in particular in Canada, and more recently reportedly was involved in trying to get some of these high technology rockets from Syria into Lebanon. But Hezbollah has a large cadre of people like him, and more to the point, they have a large cadre of fighters. They're proving themselves very, very capable on the ground. Certainly, they're full-time fighters in Syria, but they are stretched thin. They are worried about Israel taking advantage of the fact that they're distracted in Syria. And they have, as I've written in a piece that came out today, a real ideological crisis. Hezbollah is supposed to be a resistance organization resisting Israel. Israel is not in Syria. Syria. What it's doing in Syria has nothing to do with Israel. Hezbollah spent a long time trying to convince other Lebanese parties that everything it does is first and foremost in the Lebanese interest. It's very, very difficult, I'd argue impossible, to say that what it's doing in Syria is in the Lebanese interest. It's in Hezbollah's interest as a party, it's in Iran's interest, but it's not in Lebanon's interest, because what Hezbollah and others are doing, but Hezbollah more than others, is creating a situation where a rebellion that became a civil war has become a sectarian conflict, which is spilling over borders. And in Lebanon, it's in Tripoli, it's in the Dahya, in the southern suburbs of Beirut. The kind of sectarian fighting which could, God forbid, lead to renewed civil war in Lebanon is clearly not in Lebanon's interest. And so Hezbollah is facing a real ideological crisis, political crisis at home, even as it is doing quite well militarily in Syria.
Finally and briefly, Matthew, who was responsible, in your opinion? Was it the Israelis via a proxy, or was it a Sunni group who killed Laqiz?
I don't know that we can answer that definitively. The Israelis have sometimes used proxies. That's entirely possible. And there are reports that he was on some type of Israeli hit list, unconfirmed media reports. But the fact of the matter is now, ironically, that Hezbollah's #1 most dangerous immediate enemy today is not Israel, it's the Sunni rebels. And the Sunni rebels have every interest in targeting Hezbollah in Lebanon, where it's weaker and where it has softer targets, given what Hezbollah is doing to the rebels in Syria. I think, frankly, the most likely scenario right now is that it was the Sunni rebels, but we simply don't know. And it's possible that some Sunni rebel did this with some type of support without realizing that support ultimately came from Israel. It's a complicated region. It's a question that just can't be answered right now.
As you said, Matthew, it is indeed a complicated region. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm afraid we've run out of time, and that's it for the France 24 interview. Do stay with us here on France 24.